Okay, today we step quietly into a question that echoes beneath the surface of every moment we live. Who are you? Beneath all the noise, not the roles, not the routines, not even the thoughts that come and go like wind through leaves. Just you. Still, observing, alive, as we scroll through news feeds, flip through tasks, adjust to the pace of a society that rarely pauses. Something ancient within us begins to wonder, is this truly who I am, or merely who I've become while trying to keep up? This question isn't new. In fact, it has been asked for millennia, in temples, on stone steps, within prisons, and in private journals written under candlelight. And it is precisely here, in this timeless inquiry, that Stoic philosophy finds its footing. In the Stoic worldview, self-knowledge isn't indulgent, it is essential. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the world's most reluctant emperor, scribbled quietly in his journal between wars and plagues, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good." This wasn't poetry, but survival. For the Stoics, knowing the self was a matter of liberation. The only path to true inner freedom, to know what is yours and what is not, what you can govern and what must be released, begins with this first discipline. And yet, in today's hyper-connected, fast-moving culture, the self is often buried beneath performance, beneath expectations, algorithms, projections. We perform not only for others, but for ourselves, endlessly constructing an identity that reacts rather than reflects. The cost of this, though subtle, is immense. A quiet disconnection from our own center, an erosion of inner freedom. So the question returns, gentle but persistent. Is there a way back to ourselves? In this episode, we'll journey through this timeless search. We'll walk through ancient biographies and modern science, uncover stories from buried temples and distant manuscripts, all in service of understanding what it means to truly know oneself. We'll examine how self-knowledge leads to freedom, not just in theory, but in daily life, through loss, decision, stillness, and choice. From the Stoic texts to archaeological discoveries, from cultural rituals to subtle psychological shifts, each layer we explore brings us closer to the solid ground beneath the swirl of modern existence. And maybe, just maybe, it brings us closer to that inner freedom no one can grant and no one can take. There is a quiet kind of fatigue that arrives not from failure, but from living too quickly. At the end of a full day, you may find yourself checking the last email, responding to the last request, finishing the last errand, only to pause and wonder where exactly the day went. You may have done everything expected of you and still feel untouched by meaning. This is the fog of modern life, a life shaped more by reaction than intention. In a culture obsessed with efficiency and productivity, the question of who we are beneath all this activity is not often asked, let alone answered. Stoic philosophy begins exactly where modern life forgets to look. It does not scold the busy, nor does it glorify idle. It simply invites us to examine, are you choosing how to live, or are you being lived by something else? Seneca, in his famous letter on the shortness of life, reminds us that it is not time we lack, but clarity. We allow our lives to be fragmented by distraction, urgency, and fear of missing out. But what if missing out is precisely what we need in order to find what truly matters? As we move through each day, we absorb roles. We become the colleague, the partner, the friend, the performer. We respond to expectations without pausing to see if they belong to us. Stoicism asks us to step back. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man of his time, wrote daily reminders to himself that he was not his titles, not his public image, not even his thoughts. You have power over your mind, he wrote, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. His journals were not meant for readers. They were meditations for returning to his own center. Even in a crowd, even amid noise, there are moments when something breaks through. A forgotten scent, a line from an old song, the sound of birds against a gray sky. These are not trivial moments. They are memories, messengers. They remind us of something that has not been fully lost, only buried. The Stoics saw these moments as small awakenings. In between meetings and messages, between duties and deadlines, there is a space we can step into. The space where the self resides, not as an identity to perform, but as a presence to return to. Daily life offers us countless mirrors. Stoics believed that how you tie your shoes, how you greet your neighbor, how you wash your hands, these things reveal your mind more than abstract thoughts. Are you rushing, avoiding, pretending, or are you aware, open, steady? Marcus Aurelius urged himself to meet every act with purpose. The mundane, in this view, is sacred. If you cannot be present while slicing bread, how will you be present in crisis? To know the self is not to escape life, but to enter it more fully, with attention and humility. But attention is difficult in an age of performance. Today, even sincerity can become a show. Social media blurs the line between self-expression and self-marketing. We may post from the heart, but also with an eye on the algorithm. This constant projection of the self gradually replaces reflection on the self. The Stoics were not against expression, but they were deeply cautious about illusion. Know when you are acting. Know for whom. If your identity depends entirely on the reactions of others, you will always be at their mercy. Real freedom begins when you no longer need applause. More than 12,000 years ago, in what is now southeastern Turkey, people gathered on a hill to build what is believed to be the world's oldest temple. Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture and writing, yet its massive stone pillars were carved with animals, symbols, and abstract forms. There were no homes nearby, no signs of ordinary life. It was a site devoted entirely to meaning. Scholars still debate what exactly took place there. Perhaps worship, perhaps memory, but what matters is this. Before humans tamed crops, they created spaces to ask questions. Who are we? Why are we here? What lies beyond the visible? The impulse toward self-understanding is ancient. We see echoes of this even today in forgotten traditions. In one remote Himalayan village, morning begins in silence. No one speaks until the sun rises. The belief is simple. Words should not begin the day. Listening should. The first voice you hear should be your own. This is not superstition. It is discipline. It honors the idea that speech without clarity leads to noise, and noise without direction leads to confusion. The Stoics might not have known this village, but they would have understood the ritual. Begin each day with intention. Begin with stillness. Begin with the self. Epictetus, born into slavery, taught that our greatest power is the ability to choose our response. He could not control his master. He could not control his fate, but he could control his attention. His dignity came from knowing what belonged to him and what did not. To modern ears, this sounds too simple, but simplicity is often misjudged. Knowing yourself is not about achieving perfection. It is about recognizing what cannot be taken from you. Your clarity, your values, your will. These are yours if you choose to know them. And once you do, the world loses much of its power to unseat you. So much of modern life is about leaving ourselves behind. We outsource memory to machines. We let our schedules think for us. We crowd our senses with content until nothing quiet remains. And yet, within each of us, there is a part that does not move. It waits, it watches, it whispers. This is the place Stoicism leads us back to, not through rejection of the world, but through awareness of our place in it. We are not meant to vanish into our roles. We are meant to carry our essence into everything we do. And to do that, we must first know what that essence is. To know the self is not to define it in isolation, but to discover it in relation to adversity. The Stoics believed that difficulty was not an obstacle to identity, but the context in which identity is revealed. You do not know your patience until it is tested. You do not know your courage until fear appears. And you do not know your freedom until something threatens to take it away. What remains, when everything else is removed, is not just the self, but the measure of its resilience. This is why the Stoics welcome discomfort, not as punishment, but as mirror. Consider Epictetus, a man born enslaved, beaten, and ultimately crippled. He owned nothing, possessed no legal power, and held no social rank. Yet his name endures not for what he lacked, but for what he uncovered. In the dust of constraint, he discovered the gold of agency. He taught that no one can make you feel anger, shame, or fear without your consent. Your mind, he insisted, is your last line of freedom. If you guard that gate, no tyrant can truly conquer you. He lived this truth, not in palaces, but in small rooms with little more than thought and choice. Today, we may not live under emperors, but we carry other kinds of chains. Expectations, comparison, the relentless urge to prove, perform, and please. These prisons are harder to see because they come disguised as ambition. We are told to strive, to rise, to become more. But more of what? If you chase success without knowing who you are, each achievement becomes another layer of disguise. You will become efficient but not free, praised but not whole. The Stoics invite us to pause and ask the difficult question. Is this pursuit aligned with my values, or merely feeding my restlessness? This is not an argument against growth. The Stoics themselves were men of action. Marcus Aurelius led armies. Seneca advised emperors, but their action was grounded in inner clarity. They acted not to gain status, but to express virtue. For them, success was not measured by outcomes, but by integrity. Were you honest? Did you act from principle or panic? These were their metrics. And these are still available to us today, even when the world defines worth by metrics far more hollow and far more unstable. Imagine for a moment a monastery in the Judean desert, where early Stoic-influenced Christian monks lived in silence. practicing asceticism not to escape life but to strip it of illusion. One such figure, Abba Moses the Black, a former robber turned hermit, once said, "Sit in your cell, and your cell will teach you everything." His cell was not only stone walls, but the limitations that forced inward seeing. The desert offered no distractions. In the stillness, all that remained was the confrontation between self and self. We do not all need deserts, but we do need space. Space from noise, from false need, from our own self. There is a psychological clarity that emerges when we meet our limits. Consider the mountaineer caught in a storm, the parent caring for a sick child, the nurse working alone during a night shift. In these moments, all the decorative parts of identity fall away. No one cares how many followers you have. No one is impressed by your resume. What matters is presence, patience, steadiness. These are the deep structures of the self. They are not glamorous. They are not often photographed, but they are the pillars that keep the soul upright when circumstances collapse. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, echoed this Stoic truth in his book Man's Search for Meaning. Stripped of everything, family, possessions, safety, freedom, he wrote that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. This choice, though small, is the foundation of dignity. In the camps, some stole bread, while others gave it. Some turned cruel, while others protected the weak. Frankl saw that, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space, we find ourselves. That space is where the Stoic lives. In daily life, this space is easy to overlook. Someone cuts you off in traffic. Your phone pings with criticism. Your child cries while you're in the middle of a meeting. The urge to react is immediate, but the Stoic path urges one breath, one step back. Is this worth your peace? Are you choosing your response or repeating your reflex? You do not need to be perfect. You need only to become aware. Awareness turns reaction into reflection, and in reflection, freedom is born. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within it. In ancient Athens, there were public spaces called stoas, shaded walkways, where philosophers would teach among merchants and citizens. Stoicism was born not in ivory towers but in marketplaces. Its lessons were made for life, not lectures. To be Stoic was not to retreat, but to remain engaged while anchored. The point was, not to avoid difficulty, but to move through it with steadiness. To walk into the noise without becoming it. To feel emotion without being ruled by it. This kind of freedom is not grand. It is quiet, cumulative, and deeply personal. This may sound like emotional detachment, but it is not. Stoics did not reject emotion. They respected it. They simply refused to be owned by it. When grief came, they mourned. When joy visited, they received it, but through it all, they remained grounded in what was theirs, their reason, their perspective, their moral compass. They did not aim for numbness. They aimed for harmony. When the inner world is ordered, the outer world loses its tyranny. And even in chaos, one can walk calmly, not because the storm is gone, but because the self is no longer lost in it. The journey inward is often portrayed as a solitary act, but in truth, it prepares us to serve more wisely. A person who knows themselves is less likely to cause harm out of fear, envy, or confusion. They do not seek to control others because they have already learned to guide themselves. Their presence becomes a quiet offering. Not dramatic, not loud, but like a mountain, quietly holding space. The Stoics knew that inner freedom is not an escape from the world, but a way of standing within it that brings stability to others as well. We return, then, to the question we began with: what is the self beneath the layers? What is left when performance ends? When the noise fades, when you are not being watched? This is not a riddle to solve, but a direction to walk. The Stoics do not hand us answers. They offer tools, reflection, journaling, contemplation of death, attention to habit. And above all, the relentless question: is this up to me? In every difficulty, that question reorients us. In every success, it humbles us. In every silence, it teaches us to listen again. To know oneself is not only to look inward, but also to look backward. The past is not gone. It lingers in language, in habit, in ritual. Each of us is shaped by layers of inheritance. Some remembered, some forgotten. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius kept a list of qualities he admired in those who shaped him. Discipline from his grandfather, kindness from his mother, restraint from his teacher. He wrote not to flatter them, but to remind himself of the foundation he stood upon. Self-knowledge begins with humility, the recognition that we are not isolated, but inherited beings. In a cave in southern France, handprints cover the walls. Thousands of years old, they were made by people who lived, hunted, and gathered beneath the stars. Some were large, others small. Some are outlined in ochre, others pressed in ash. No one knows their names, no one remembers their stories, and yet the gesture remains. I was here. I left a mark. What were they trying to say? Perhaps nothing more than this. I existed, I saw, I belonged. These hands remind us that knowing the self is not about abstract thought, but about presence. To press one's being into the world, even briefly, is an act of awareness. In Japan, there is an ancient art called kintsugi, the mending of broken pottery with gold. The cracks are not hidden, but honored. The repair becomes part of the history of the object, a visible record of its journey. This practice speaks to the Stoic soul. Life does not promise wholeness. It promises change, loss, interruption, but identity is not shattered by breakage. It is revealed by how we respond. When Epictetus spoke of suffering, he did not deny pain. He simply refused to be defined by it. We may be cracked, but we need not be discarded. The self includes every fracture. Across cultures and centuries, people have created rituals not to escape daily life, but to see it more clearly. In the communities of the Arctic North, traditional joik songs are not just music, but personal expressions of identity. A joik is not about a person. It is the person, their essence, in melody. You do not perform a joik for applause. You carry it as a memory, a presence. This echoes the Stoic view that character is expressed not in words, but in tone, in behavior, in daily rhythms. The truest self is not told. It is lived. Memory plays a quiet role in how we shape identity. But memory is not only what we recall. It is also what we reenact. Family dinners, small gestures, sacred routines, all of these form the architecture of the self. Yet we often go through these acts passively. The Stoics invite us to re-enter them with intention. When you wash your hands, be aware. When you greet someone, be genuine. When you eat, taste. These are not spiritual gimmicks. They are acts of remembering that you are here, that you are awake, that you are shaping yourself in this moment. Consider the ruins of Pompeii. When Vesuvius erupted, time was frozen. Loaves of bread left in ovens, tools resting on tables, graffiti still visible on walls. In the suddenness of death, life was preserved. We can see how they lived. Not just emperors, but bakers, slaves, children. Their gestures remain. And in their gestures, so do their selves. The Stoics taught memento mori. Remember that you will die. But this reminder was not meant to depress. It was meant to clarify. Life is fragile, but within that fragility lies a chance to live deliberately. Each moment is an imprint. What kind of imprint are you leaving? The modern world tempts us to outsource the self. Algorithms predict our desires. Devices speak our thoughts before we finish them. But in this convenience, something quiet is lost. The friction of choice, the pause of reflection, the silence between impulses. Knowing the self requires solitude, and solitude requires resistance. Not rejection of connection, but a return to intentional being. Seneca warned of people who were everywhere, but never with themselves. He saw that presence is not a location, but a relationship. To know yourself, you must first be with yourself. In rural Bali, daily offerings called kaneng sori are placed outside homes each morning. Small woven baskets filled with flowers, rice, and incense. They are not grand gestures, but simple acknowledgments of life, of balance, of gratitude. These acts do not take much time, but they direct the mind toward what matters. The Stoics might not have used flowers or incense, but they too practiced daily offerings. Not to gods, but to virtue. A few minutes of reflection, a return to values, a note in a journal. These are small things, but in their repetition, identity forms. The process of knowing oneself is not fast. It is not found in a single revelation. It unfolds slowly, like a tide pulling back to reveal what lies beneath. We peel away performance, expectation, distraction, and what we find may not be dramatic. It may be ordinary, but it will be ours. The Stoics remind us that we are not building personas. We are uncovering foundations. When you know what you stand on, the winds of opinion, success, and failure lose their power to unseat you. You may bend, but you will not break. Philosophy is often imagined as something abstract, but for the Stoics, it was practical, lived, visible, in action. It showed itself in how you held your tongue, how you responded to insult, how you spent your afternoon. It asked not how much you knew, but how much you embodied. In the end, to know the self is not about answers. It is about alignment between what you believe and how you move, between what you value and what you say yes to, between the inner and the outer. That alignment is quiet, but its peace is unmistakable. To know oneself in the modern world is to swim upstream. The current of distraction is strong, pulling us constantly towards screens, toward comparison, toward the next opinion, the next sensation. Rarely are we asked to stop. Even more rarely are we invited to be alone with our thoughts. And yet, without that solitude, the self becomes blurry, indistinct, shaped by external impressions rather than internal convictions. The Stoics remind us that clarity is not the absence of noise, but the ability to hear one's own voice amid it. And that voice does not shout. It whispers. We live in an age of opinions. We are trained to have them, display them, defend them. But when was the last time you asked yourself where your belief came from? Was it learned through experience, inherited from family, absorbed from culture, or borrowed unconsciously? The Stoics urged constant examination, not self-doubt, but Epictetus warned that opinions, once accepted without scrutiny, become chains. They lead us not to truth, but to stubbornness. To know oneself is to sift, to separate what has been placed upon you from what genuinely arises within. One of the great ironies of our time is that we are hyper-connected and yet deeply lonely, surrounded by information, yet starved for understanding. The Stoics would not be surprised. They knew that the crowd can be a form of exile, that being seen does not mean being known, and that the presence of others does not guarantee the presence of the self. Marcus Aurelius often wrote about standing alone in a palace full of people. He reminded himself to retreat not into isolation, but into his inner citadel, a fortress of character, not stone. This inner citadel is not a wall to keep the world out. It is a structure that allows us to meet the world without losing ourselves in it. It is not emotional numbness, but emotional clarity. To feel, but not be ruled. To care, but not be consumed. To grieve, but not be destroyed. In our age of overstimulation, this clarity is rare. Emotions are amplified by algorithms. Outrage is rewarded. Reflection is ignored. But the Stoics call us back. They ask not whether your feeling is valid, but whether it is helpful. Does it serve virtue? Does it lead you toward peace? Imagine walking into a room full of mirrors. Each one reflects a different version of you. The professional, the friend, the online persona, the family role, all of them partly true, none of them complete. The danger lies in mistaking the reflection for the reality, in becoming so used to being watched that we forget how to simply be. Seneca warned against performing for the crowd, not because performance is inherently bad, but because it can become addictive. You begin to shape yourself, not according to what is right, but what is popular, and in doing so, you abandon the compass within. Self-awareness is not selfish. It is the foundation of ethical life. When you know your impulses, you can choose your responses. When you understand your shadows, you stop projecting them onto others. When you accept your flaws, you cease needing to diminish those of others. The Stoics believed that inner freedom was not just a personal goal, but a social responsibility. A person at peace with themselves is less likely to seek control, less likely to manipulate, less likely to harm. In this way, knowing the self becomes an active care for the world. Consider the Confucian ideal of rectification of the mind. The belief that before one can lead others, one must first cultivate harmony within. This echoes the Stoic idea that governance begins with self. A philosopher king is not wise because of education alone, but because he understands the territory of his own mind. The storm inside must be calmed before he can guide others through theirs. In modern terms, this applies not only to leaders, but to every parent, teacher, friend. Before offering advice, ask, have I lived this? Do I know where my voice ends and where my fear begins? In the highlands of Peru, there is a ritual called Aini, the sacred principle of reciprocity. You give, not for reward, but because balance demands it. When someone gives to you, you must give back, but not immediately, not as transaction, rather, as a continuation of harmony. This principle applies to the self as well. We demand clarity, energy, purpose, but do we offer attention, nourishment, silence? The Stoics saw the self not as a fixed object, but as a field to be tended. You cannot harvest from a soil you have never watered. What you give inwardly, you live outwardly. In cities, many people go days without hearing their own footsteps. Constant noise fills every hallway, music in elevators, advertisements in subways, even silence has become monetized. Sold back to us through apps and headphones. But silence, true silence, is not an escape. It is a return. The Stoics sat quietly, not because they hated the world, but because they wanted to meet it fully. They knew that unless you can face yourself in stillness, you will project your unrest onto everything. And so, they wrote, not books for readers, but letters to the soul. We do not need to abandon society to follow this path. We do not need to renounce technology or retreat into mountains. We simply need to insert moments of pause, a breath before speaking, a walk without a device, a journal line in the morning. These are not indulgences. The Stoics offer us a toolkit, not commandments. They do not ask you to be perfect, only consistent. To come home to yourself daily, gently, patiently, to fail and return, to feel and realign. This is not a formula, it is a rhythm, one that moves with life, not against it. Freedom in the Stoic sense is not freedom to do whatever you want. It is the freedom to choose rightly, even when doing so is hard, to forgive when it would be easier to resent, to remain calm when chaos surrounds you, to speak truth even when silence tempts. This kind of freedom is not advertised. It is not glamorous, but it is deep. It anchors the soul. And once you've tasted it, you begin to see how much of modern life trades comfort for confinement. The prison is well decorated, but it is still a prison. The door, however, has always been unlocked. We began this journey in the midst of noise, the flickering pace of modern life, the endless cycle of messages, updates, and obligations. Perhaps you were listening while multitasking. Perhaps your mind wandered. That's okay, because even in a storm, even in distraction, there can be a moment of stillness, a return, and that return is always available. Not as a dramatic transformation, but as a quiet remembering that beneath everything, you are here, and you are not defined by what others expect, but by what you choose to honor. The Stoics never asked us to become indifferent. They asked us to become steady. They asked us to live in the world, not above it, not below it, but through it, with clarity, humility, and courage. To know the self is not to find a perfect identity, but to stop running from it. It is to face yourself, not just when things are calm, but especially when they are not. And to ask, again and again, not what do others want from me, but what do I want to be in this brief and burning life? In a world that rushes you toward reaction, the choice to pause is radical. In a world that celebrates image, the decision to listen inward is revolutionary. And in a life that will someday end, the effort to live awake, even just for a few quiet moments each day, is sacred. The Stoics knew this. They lived this. And now, so can you. So let me leave you with this. When was the last time you sat in silence? Not to escape the world, but to return to yourself. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation.